It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, highlighting all that goes into managing our national parks and building a sense of appreciation for the invaluable beauty, diversity, and history of our protected lands. Today we have Steve Mietz with us, Redwood National and State Parks Superintendent. Redwood National and State Parks are located in Northern California with diverse ecosystems, including coastal, prairie, and river environments, and are home to the tallest trees in the world, the redwoods, reaching heights of over 350 feet. To put that into perspective for everyone, that's taller than the Statue of Liberty, which is 305 feet, and can be as tall as a 25 to 30-story building. Redwood National and State Parks also present a unique partnership between the National Park Service and California State Parks. Steve himself has been superintendent since 2017 and has led amazing restorations and species reintroduction projects that we'll get to dive into in our conversation. Steve, I'm beyond excited to dig into your time at Redwood National and State Parks. Welcome to Who Runs This Park.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about my favorite park.
Heck yeah. Well, I'm excited to hear about it. I've never been, so I'm learning vicariously through you and then hope to further that experience by actually going to the park one day. Can you share a memorable situation you've experienced as Redwood Superintendent?
Yeah, there's quite a few. And so, I like to say, and I like to live my life kind of in a way that, kind of like every day I try to find something special and in the Redwoods, and actually at every park I've been in, I always try to make sure that as I'm visiting the park, I just take a few minutes to reflect in nature itself and for the reason why I'm there. And so, every day has a special moment, but there are some bigger moments that have happened over the last 7 years that I've been here. And one that comes to mind is our large scale restoration program called Redwood Rising, which I'm sure we'll dive into deeply here.
Yes.
Today. We had our 5-year anniversary last year and was able to bring everyone together, and who help with the implementation, the science pieces, the contracting, all the different players got together, and we had basically like a big celebration and party, including, political folks, everyone who helped carry the water and get this thing going. And it was just really magnificent to see the energy and spirit coming out of COVID, which is another memorable moment, maybe not as pleasant, right? The chaos and kind of just sadness of that entire dark period. And throughout all that, we started Redwood Rising, this restoration project, in the midst of it because it's such an urgent need. And just to be able to capture that what I call the audacity of hope, and that the project represents having hope in this time when everyone else seems to be so cynical. It's such a cynical time that Redwoods National and State Parks can be a symbol of hope, that the National Park Service and nature as a restorative place can be a symbol of hope for its employees, as well as just everyone around the world, is really even more powerful now than ever. And that event really brought that home, that we are bringing hope to the world with this work beyond just restoring watersheds. It's more than that. It's actually giving folks something to believe in, which I think is just so important this day and age. So
yeah, absolutely. I would love to dig into the Redwood Rising right now, and then we'll kind of bounce around.
Sure.
But it's something I'm excited to learn about. So can you share with folks specifically what that was started for, what its purpose is, and kind of the state of the union, dare we say?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm happy to. And so Redwood Rising is the latest generation of a lot of work that's been done in the past in Redwood National and State Parks to restore this ecosystem. So I have to kind of build a little time machine and go back in time to, like, let's say the turn of like the last century, right? In the 1910s, and where they built railroads to come up and started harvesting the largest trees, right, in the world, and the tallest trees in the world. and because of their amazing size and volume of high quality wood products, but also because the wood itself is very resistant. It's beautiful wood, right? It's redwood,
Hmm.
if you haven't seen, and it's very resistant to rot. So it has very merchantable, right? It has a lot
Hmm.
of economic value, and so, but because of the size and the remoteness of the park and the area, it was very challenging up to around the 50s or 60s to really remove those trees. And then, but then come post-war mechanization and technology was able to really do some large scale
Mm.
harvesting of this forest. And so to the point where now 95% of the coastal redwoods are gone. They've all been harvested of
What?
old growth, right? And so the park, the only 5% left of old growth redwoods left out of its original habitat that runs from about Santa Cruz, California, all the way up to just over the Oregon border. So that entire
Uh-huh.
coastal forest has pretty much been clear cut at this point, and now it's regrown into second growth, and that's part of what I'll get there. And so Redwood National and State Parks represents about 45% of the old growth that's left on the planet. So of that
Wow.
5% that's left, 45% of it, we are the stronghold for old growth redwoods in the
Yeah.
world, basically. And so that's our park purpose. And it's a pretty meaningful purpose. This giant ecosystem basically been wiped out, except for the national and state parks here preserving these small parcels of old growth that are left. And so we have some rather large chunks up here, thank goodness. And so that's part of what we're doing. But all that's to say, the park is 133,000 acres, but of that, 2/3 of it is this clear cut that's already been harvested, basically gone in and really just went out and took every tree off the landscape, and didn't do this in a way that they do it in modern times where they would build bridges and they just would fill in streams, get in, get out. It was quick and dirty. They, as quick as much money as they could make. And so this was
Right.
not done under modern forest practice rules. And so what we have left over in 2/3 of the park, so 1/3, 40,000 acres is old growth, which is what most people come to see. And it's what you
Right.
envision and what all the pictures are of, these giant trees and ferns and a really, intact ecosystem that supports a variety of critters that depend on it,
Yeah.
and that people get great peace from. And then 2/3 of the park is a very unhealthy, fire prone, just messy, too many trees per acre. It's just there's nothing growing in the understory. It's basically an ecological desert, and
Yeah.
critters really can't use it. And so that 2/3 of the park needs to be restored. And the park was established, the national park was established in 1968 and then expanded in 78. And in that 10-year period, they recognized in 1978 in our legislation, it said, hey, we recognize all this clear cut area needs to be restored. And
Yeah.
so they actually put it in our legislation, and what our enabling legislation, which is what a lot of parks have. Our enabling legislation is very unique in that it has something that says you shall restore your park back to
Yeah.
old growth conditions. And Congress appropriated money to do that for the 80s
Wow.
and 90s. And we learned how to do large scale restoration. We, the Park Service, learned how to do that and did do a great deal of road removal, watershed restoration, stabilizing, trying to reduce the erosion. There were landslides. As you can imagine, in a rainforest, if you cut down the forest, it kind of tends to slide into creeks and create big
Yeah.
mudslides, and it's just in landslides all over the place, ecological disaster. And so
Yeah.
so they did great work in the 80s and 90s to stabilize it. But then around the year 2000 or so, that appropriated money from Congress started to dry up. And so for 10 or
Mm.
15 years, the park kind of did research on, as they watched this continue, they did research about forest techniques, thinning techniques to help make the forest healthy. Like they did experiments here and there, but there was no large scale funding for it. And then about now 6 years ago, we partnered up. We realized that we really need to address this. They're
Yeah.
fire prone forests, climate change. We got to build resiliency into this second growth forest.
Yeah.
And who better to do that than the national and state parks? And so we partnered, but we didn't have a mechanism to raise the money. And so what we did is we partnered with a nonprofit partner called Save the Redwoods League, who's the
Uh-huh.
group that basically a big part of the park they bought back in the 20s and then donated to state parks. That's part of our
Oh,
Redwood
wow.
National and State Park. So they've been around as long as the National Park Service and as long as California State Parks. They're very old and treasured nonprofit in the state of California. And without them, a lot of the old growth redwoods would not even exist. What little that does exist left. So we
Yeah.
partnered with them and made them kind of the fiscal agent. We said, help us raise money as a private philanthropy, help us raise money. And they did. And they raised millions for us to do what we would say, not to get too technical, programmatic compliance. We did large scale, 45,000 acres of compliance so that we can make this
Wow.
project shovel ready and ready to receive funding from whatever sources we could get. And we had this nonprofit partner provide that seed money to get going.
Yeah.
And once we did that planning work, we're now in our 5th year of implementation. And basically we've been able to raise, between public and private funds and private philanthropy, we've been able to raise about $100 million to
Wow.
restore this landscape because it's shovel ready, but also because it's such an inspiring story and such an urgent need. It addresses
Yeah.
so many different things. And so the 3 different pieces it addresses real quickly is that there's three legs to the stool of Redwood Rising. And so the first leg is what I talked about, road removal. So we had to go in and remove all these old roads that were in there that are disturbing the hydrology. And then we had to go back in and dig out all the creeks where all the soil went and fell into the valley. We kind of are literally rebuilding mountains. We're not just closing roads with a Kelly hump. We're actually recontouring the mountains. We're rebuilding the mountains here in Redwood Park. And then the third part is we're doing selected thinning in these second growth forests that are just sick and unhealthy and fire prone. And we're actually, where we can and where it's appropriate and where the forest prescription works for it, we actually remove some of that biomass from the landscape to help reduce the fuel loading, but also to help, most importantly, to get the ecosystem to bounce back.
Right.
But not all hope is lost. What we've shown is that even in like a year later, after we've done this restoration work, the vegetation comes right back. It's a very resilient ecosystem.
Yeah.
It just needs a little bit of help to get it on the trajectory towards old growth conditions. And so once we do that and we get it going towards old growth conditions, it bounces back. We have seen trout and salmon come back to the very creeks that we've daylighted the year before. So there's creeks that have been buried under sediment for 50 years. We daylighted, and within a year, the fish are back in the creeks. And so it's pretty amazing and pretty inspiring story. And so that's
so
a
cool.
big part of what we do here. And we got a lot of work to do. We have 80,000 acres. Right now we have about 45,000 that we're working on in this first stage, but we're not stopping here. We're trying to show folks there are a way to do this, and there's a way to address these big challenges like climate change and large scale restoration. And it can be done. You just have to start somewhere and just start chipping away at it. And that's what we've been doing. And that is Redwood Rising.
Amazing to learn more about that. One thing I wanted to bring up, or I have 2 kind of main questions.
Mm-hmm.
The first is, when I was researching, I learned about a dog hair forest, which I think is what the forest is called after a clear cut, correct?
Yeah. So because Redwood National Park was bought from previously, timberlands. These are timber companies.
Yeah.
And so when they harvested it and they basically clear cut it, they went back and they airly reseeded from helicopters with a species they preferred. Because redwoods take a longer to grow, they were reseeding with Douglas fir. And so they went and seeded out a bunch of seeds, and they purposely do that. And then they expected to go back and thin that. That's actually a forest practice that a timber company would do. But then when the park bought it, we don't generally log our forest, right? We're the National Park Service. We don't cut down trees. We save trees, right? But in this case, when you buy a clear-cut piece of land and it has too many trees per acre, you have to do something. You have to take action to thin that. And so that's why we have, the dog hair is a colloquial term for just basically in an old growth forest, you'll have about maybe let's say 40 to 50 trees per acre. In some of these second growth forests, we're looking at hundreds, if not thousands of trees per acre, right? So it's orders of magnitude sometimes of too many trees. And with that much, they're all competing against each other. They're all thin and they're never going to be released. And another thing to know about redwoods is that when you cut them down, they're not dead yet. Like those stumps will resprout. Many of them, not all of them. And so they will resprout. So the genetic diversity of the redwood forest that's been clear cut is not completely lost. The same original redwoods that are hundreds and thousands of years old are still here. They've regrown, but then they're getting out competed by all these thin Doug fir. So if we can go in and we select and try to turn it back into a redwood forest that it originally was. And we also just remove all this competition so that the trees that remain are healthier and they get bigger faster. And the part that in this part of the study, and we can touch upon this further, is as we do that, we're actually allowing the trees to sequester more carbon, right? So these trees live for thousands of years. They're giant, right? And so acre for acre, the redwood forest is the best carbon sink on the planet, better than the Amazon, better than anywhere else. So as we do these investments in forest health here, we're going to get a better carbon sink than any other natural carbon sink, at least forestry related, on the planet. And so it's truly an amazing story, and the benefits just are so widespread with this project, which is why I'm so excited about it.
Yeah, no, I can hear the excitement in your voice, and that's really fun for me to hear about. And I'm excited for listeners to hear that excitement. And also, just it's not every time I do a national park superintendent interview where we get to dive into like the nitty gritty of the park. And so I'm really enjoying that aspect of just learning about, the redwoods, which make the Redwood National Park and state parks the redwoods. But before we get into the
Mhm.
carbon sequestration, there's one thing I want to bring up because I think
Mhm.
it's so fascinating and I'm just very intrigued by the redwood trees in general. But
Mhm.
I listened to a podcast called The Wild with Chris Morgan. Did you hear about that?
I haven't.
They actually interviewed, I believe it was someone from Redwood National Park
Okay.
and state parks, but one of the folks that goes up in the tree and does
Oh,
studies
okay.
in the different like climate levels
Yeah, and
almost.
the canopy itself is its own ecosystem that's
Yeah,
unique
so
on the
I'd
planet. Yes.
I'd love for folks to learn about that a little bit. So if you could
Oh,
share kind of just how there's different ecosystems within the redwood canopy itself, and then how climate change is kind of affecting the cloud and fog coverage and how
mhm.
that will affect the redwoods.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so yeah, those the redwoods are a fascinating tree, right? So there's so much you'll have to stop me with to stop talking about redwood trees because they're just such an interesting and exciting tree. And so they've been around for a very long time,
Yes.
for millions of years, right? So why is that? Why is that they're around for so long? And it's because it's because they've really developed ways to fight off disease and insects, and they have this, and so all those tannins that makes it red, that fights off a lot of different things that kill other
Mm,
trees. And then they have a really thick bark, so they're actually naturally fire resistant in their
mhm.
best, especially in the old growth forest. And so the trees have they actually, there's studies been done, and that redwoods have 3 times the genetic material of human beings. And so
Wow.
there's so many fascinating things. So the redwood trees, you touched on the fog. And so about 50% of their water comes from the fog, and they capture it. And so their needles are actually designed at the top and the middle and the lower to either capture water or capture sunlight. And so they
Mhm.
maximize. So there's 3 different types of needles. They're all different shape. They've evolved in different shapes. So no matter where you are on the canopy, the needles of a tree will actually be different depending on if you're at the lower, middle, or
Oh,
upper part,
interesting.
depending on how much sunlight or fog they want to capture. So there's so much interesting things with that. In terms of the canopy itself, when you go up into the canopy, there are a variety of endemic species, or species that only live in the canopy,
Uh-huh.
including like bugs and critters, but also like there's certain ferns that, like, some of these plants that live off the air. It's just wild to think about a whole nother ecosystem that is, you're on the ground looking up and you wouldn't even know there's a whole nother world
Yeah.
up there of all these critters that, there's a lot of endangered species we can talk about that are dependent on old growth characteristics of this forest, right? But the critters that never even leave a single tree, like they live their whole life in a canopy. I like to think about, and as you stand at the base of one of these trees, you think there's whole critters that live their entire life, and whole
Yeah.
plants and animals that never leave this canopy. And it's just so fascinating. And that's what makes it so special. And they're so special to protect. And it's, of course, in the park, we don't allow climbing. There's a lot of interest in climbing. We can talk about that too, is
Yeah.
it's in doing that. And we've had some visitor use issues related to that. And it's because that ecosystem up there is so fragile. We don't want to encourage folks to climb up 300 feet into the sky. Yes, it's
Yeah.
great accomplishment for humans, but find something else to do, because there's only so much of this left. Again, it's
Yeah.
such a precious commodity, this old growth forest, and we can't have folks climbing around in the canopy because they're going to do damage on an ecosystem we barely even understand. Like, let's not destroy it before we even can study and understand it.
Yeah. And to clarify, when you say old growth forest, is there like
Mhm.
a proper definition for that?
Yes. Well, yeah. So a forester would say like late successional forest. So it's the final stage, as a forest develops from like little sprouts, and it develops through different species as it grows and changes, and will go through successional stages. The last stage is that steady state stage for the most part, where it will not change, and that's what we determine as old growth. And that means in terms of what we're looking for with the restoration work to move our second growth forest, we say we like to move it towards old growth characteristics, because it's
Mm,
never going to be old growth again. It's been cut. in hundreds of years, maybe you won't be able to tell the difference, but those second growth trees will not have the majesty of the old growth trees for
Right.
hundreds of years, but we can get old growth characteristics. And what does that mean? That means complexity in the canopy, like we're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
to provide habitat for those animals that only can exist in that canopy. And it also talks about getting bigger and big fat trees, right? That's what we're
Yeah.
looking for, big, fat, and tall trees. And that's what
Yeah.
those are old growth characteristics that you won't see in a second growth forest of a redwood forest. And so it's just the last stage of the redwood forest before a disturbance in it, without humans. Just imagine like a fire would come in, burn down a tree, or wind would blow one down. Then that creates disturbance. Then it goes back into an earlier successional stage and builds back up to old growth again, right? And that's
Oh,
typical
interesting.
across any forest, not just redwoods. And so this is the last stage this is the most mature stage, and it's like middle age or old age for a forest, and it will stay there until a disturbance comes, basically to
Wow. Okay.
reset it or set it back a few stages, then it rebuilds back to this. But it's the climax stage of a forest. That's what old
That's
growth is.
okay, cool. As I learned different things from different superintendents, I like tying things together. And
Mhm.
one thing that I learned from interviewing the Haleakala superintendent in Hawaii is the Hawaiian Islands go from Hawaii, the big island, to Kauai.
Mhm.
And it's like newer land because Hawaii has the active volcano on it, and Kauai is the oldest, and the forests kind of mimic that. So Kauai has the old growth forests. And so you saying that and explaining that is connecting that in my brain, what I didn't
Yeah.
really realize. But I like that definition, I guess, of it's the final stage of a forest. So that's very cool.
Yes.
And then the second piece I want to clarify is in these areas where you're restoring, because the stumps may still be there, you're
Mhm.
not, are you replanting any redwoods?
We
or
don't need to. Yeah, we
Okay.
don't need to do any replanting. All we need to do is get some sunlight and moisture to the forest floor,
Wow.
and stuff's already there. And so we have found that we don't need to do any replanting. But when we do the when we dig out the creeks and rebuild the mountains, then we do put actually whatever biomass we have there, logs or trees or branches, we actually put it down on the ground to hold the soil. So when the winter rains come, it doesn't actually wash all back down and ruin all the
Right.
great work we did.
Right.
And then after a few years, everything just sprouts up through the little cracks in all that wood we put
Wow.
down. And it's just like, it's truly amazing to watch. I've lived in the high desert of Great Basin National Park and other places like that, where if you disturb that, it's disturbed for hundreds of years. Like, it's going to take this ecosystem just needs a chance, right? Just give it a chance. And it's like, it's up and it's fighting as soon as it gets
Yeah.
a chance. And that's what's so great and so rewarding about working here. You see the results of what you're doing very, very quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I'm very impressed that the clear cuts happened 50 to 70 years ago, and these trees are still able to resprout. Like
Yes.
that's insane.
Yes.
Just that fact alone. So
Redwoods are a tough tree. They're very resilient. Yes.
yeah, that's so awesome. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the carbon sequestration
Mhm.
forests and I guess, the studies surrounding this and
Mhm.
what you think the future of that looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have a few studies going on right now, but like I mentioned earlier, acre for acre, we have shown, studies have shown that we're sequestering the most carbon in the old growth forest. That sequesters the most carbon.
Mhm.
But even the second growth forest is still sequestering a great deal of carbon. And so the studies that we're doing now, we've joined forces with Cal Poly Humboldt, the Northern Arizona University, and the U.S. Geological Survey to use LIDAR. We're using water isotopes. There's a whole bunch of different pieces I could go into about these studies, but basically we want to look at how quickly is Redwood rising. We expect that there'll be a dip in our carbon as we actually reset these forests and get them on
Yeah.
trajectory towards it. Will be a slight dip in terms of its carbon sink because we're actually removing all that biomass from it. But then it will start immediately. How quickly does it bounce back? And when is it starting to achieve rates of carbon storage that are similar to old growth, right? These big
Mhm.
giant trees are so big that they're putting on so much carbon and they're storing it again for thousands of years, right? Because even after it falls down on the forest floor, the trees stay there for hundreds of years because they're so rot resistant, right? And they
Yeah.
actually create this beautiful three-dimensional forest floor, right? You have different dimensions because the plants grow on top of the old trunks. It's pretty amazing forest. And so how quickly is Redwood Rising helping create this carbon sink? You get it back on the trajectory of this optimal carbon sink, which is the old growth forest, is what we're
Yeah.
studying right now. We just started that study last year. And so we'll know more here in a few years about it, but we do know the work we're doing will increase the carbon sequestration. But what is the exact number? How quickly is it happening? That's what folks want to know. They want to know how
Right.
effective is this as a carbon sink with this restoration work we're doing. And that's exactly the study that we're working on right now that hopefully we'll hear about in the next 2 years or so. We'll have probably some of the initial results on that.
And is a goal of that, obviously it's good for the climate if that's the case, is a goal if you're able to show how quickly and at what rate it's sequestering carbon, you could hopefully maybe get more funding for restoring? Or is that like a cycle?
Yes, that is a hopefully a side benefit of this is that if we can show the value of this forest as a carbon sink and this restoration work as a tool in the
Yeah.
toolbox, because there's so many tools we need to fight climate change, that this is an effective tool to fight climate change, that
Yeah.
we could use that, yes, for funding into the future, because this is expensive work, this restoration work,
Yeah.
and
I
so
mean, it sounds you're rebuilding mountains. It doesn't
that's
sound
right,
cheap.
that's right.
Can you talk a little bit about the Grove of Titans Trail and how that ties into all the different restoration projects we've talked about?
Yeah, so that's much more of a traditional visitor use issue. And so what we have, and actually it's an interesting issue to bring up to your listeners, is folks will go out and some of these really, really big trees, the redwoods that are as big as the sequoias, right? The up in the Sierras, that we have trees as big as them, and some of those get named. You're standing at the base, you don't know how tall they are because you can't. A human can't really tell between 250 and 375, right? Some of
Right.
the medium to tallest trees, and so much more these large trunk trees get named, and they get kind of mythical names, like just like the bristlecone pines do with like Methuselah and all that. And so,
Yeah.
but naming the trees then creates this opportunity for folks to feel like they want to then go visit a named tree. And
Right.
so, so what happened, and with our this invention of this internet, right, and very easy cell phones and all that, folks who just kind of spread out and kind of wander off trail in the forest, which normally would be fine. It's a resilient forest. One person doing that is fine, but then when someone puts a pin there and then puts it up on the internet and say, look, I found this tree, I'm naming it this, and
Yeah.
then 10,000 of their closest friends then go visit that tree, all of a sudden you have a social trail, right? You're trampling this entire understory. You're creating kind of a big mess in the forest, and
Yeah.
and potentially damaging the roots that are right there, that the redwood roots that are right on top, because there's so many people visiting off trail and it hasn't been done. And so that's what the Grove of Titans is. It got named externally, got put up on the internet, became socialized so much that we realized that we needed to take some action to just say, okay, this is just it's being loved to death. It's not an official site. So what we did was we go in, and actually this also happened. We were able to work with our partners, Redwood Park Conservancy and Save the Redwoods League, and they were able to raise money through private philanthropy for about
Hmm.
$3 million to
Wow.
build this trail. I know, and they're just wonderful partners, and they were able to raise this money. And basically, what they've done, some of it's just your typical trail that's on dirt, but then as you get to the grove itself, it's an elevated trail, like that basically is a test. It's a it's a new technology that we hadn't tried before, but we
Mm.
tested it out, and it's really been very effective. It's like the engineered plastic lumber that you've seen, like recycled lumber, right?
Oh, I haven't
On the
seen that.
floor, so that's rot resistant. So like if you recycle bottles, sometimes they turn that into lumber, right? Like big pieces of
Oh,
right. And
interesting.
so we use that to be rot resistant because it's a rainforest, right?
Yeah.
And then on top of that, we put a metal grate, which you think would be loud, but it is not. And then it rusts to the perfect redwood color, right? So it blends with the
Wow.
environment, but you're walking on this elevated above the floor. And then because it's a grate, all the ferns and stuff can still get light to the forest floor. And then you can walk around amidst this forest. And so that's what the Grove of Titans Trail was. And we
Oh,
unveiled
that's
that.
so
It was
cool.
actually built during COVID of all things. And then we rolled it out after COVID. We had our big ribbon cutting, and it's now one of our signature trails in the park, and it's just
Wow, that's so
absolutely
cool.
lovely. It's not too long. It can be a little strenuous, but yeah, I definitely encourage folks, if they're interested, to go visit that. That's up in Jedediah Smith Redwood State Park, which is part of Redwood National and State Park. So
Yeah, nice. As you're talking about the innovation
yeah.
in the technology to build that trail, I'm like, well,
Mhm.
that makes sense why it won the innovation award. What innovation award? I'm not sure. I don't know I don't have that in my notes of if it was from the Park Service, I
It was from the
assume.
state parks, California
Oh,
state
okay.
parks. So
Very cool. Can you talk a little bit more about, you touched on it briefly, but the kind of climbing visitor use challenges?
Yeah, that's a big one. And we have a few things we've done to address that. So, but and this is a really interesting. It's it's interesting because a lot of folks, like I mentioned earlier, these name trees, these really big trees, people um really want to climb them. And there are some trees that you can climb outside the park, and different places have set up kind of sacrificial redwoods for folks to just
Yeah.
climb and just be like, okay, this one you're going to climb, and we
Yeah.
recognize that its ecological value will be slightly less than the other ones. And that's fine, but we don't have that in the park because we're a national park and we're not going to do
Right.
that. And so we don't allow climbing, but it's too big a lure, and it's an international lure. And actually, to be honest, this is an international problem. Like most of the folks that we've been able to see, we see their videos. We know this is happening because they post their videos on
Oh, yeah.
YouTube, right? And so that's mostly, sometimes we catch them in the act, and we have done that too. I mean, we confiscate their equipment, etc. But a lot of times we'll see the video, but there'll already be, like, say, for example, it's what they call arborists over in England and Ireland and the kind of the British Isles. They formed a team and came over and did zip lining between old growth redwoods. Yeah, it was atrocious. And they put it up on the internet, and so we don't really have a mechanism by which to, we have to get the State Department and make it an international affair to get these folks to actually come
Right.
back and be liable for their damage. So all we can do is try to put out. So we do a lot of different law enforcement techniques, which I can go into if you want to try to prevent that on
Yeah.
places where we know folks have been in the past, and now it's been socialized on the internet. We can ask YouTube to take that down, which we do, but once the word's out, people are like, oh, I want to go do that too. Then we can put out cameras, we can do other things, and we can do more backcountry patrols to try to stay in front of it. In fact, I've had to put in, since I've been here, a closure around the tallest tree in the world because it was getting so much attention and being climbed too much.
Wow.
And so it's like you're gonna literally damage the tallest tree in the world. And so it's very unfortunate to have to do that, but it was off trail. It's not, we don't disclose its location, but with the internet, it's not too hard to find out. And
Yeah.
so it's the same thing, but we have mechanisms in place, and we have that we can try to at least try to get in front of it. And we're mostly trying to do education. That actually has been much more effective when we explain the importance of that canopy ecosystem we talked about, and we
Yeah.
explain how it's against the rules. And if we catch you, here's the fine. That actually has deterred a great deal of it. It's not 100%, but taking some proactive actions and just being very clear about, hey, this is important to the parks. Please don't do this activity. Most folks are compliant. So human beings
Yeah.
generally are pretty good at following the rules. There's always going to be the bad actors, and we're always going to have to catch them and keep working on it. But we've made a lot of progress on this issue in the last 10 years, and we'll just keep an eye on it. There's really no solving it. It's just an ongoing issue that we'll have probably in this park forever.
Well, it makes me think of when you learn to not walk off trail.
Mhm.
Obviously, there are some parks that are so remote that there aren't trails. Like I'm
Right.
thinking like Gates of the Arctic or something like that, where there's not enough traffic to really affect the ecosystem. But I think once you learn why you can't really walk off trail and how that damages the ecosystem, it for the most part, like you said, makes people kind of realize like, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. And I would imagine, and it seems like you've experienced that with the redwoods, of explaining how it damages the ecosystem
Mhm.
goes pretty far. Is it also damaging because I'm assuming people are using like equipment so that they
Yes,
don't
yeah. So
yeah.
yeah, so they'll be climbing up, and of course they'll say that they're expert arborists and they're not damaging the tree, but just any action is going to damage the tree. The ropes,
Yeah.
the pulleys that they
Yeah.
have to. It's like they're climbing any
Like
rock
rock
face, right? You're
face,
gonna you're
yeah.
gonna do you're gonna do damage to that as well, right? And so we can't tolerate any of that, especially with these marquee name trees. We got to really work to protect those. And so that's what it's a shame by naming them. It just kind of that's why we really discourage as a park naming any trees. It's
Yeah,
much more.
interesting.
I'm always trying to say it's about the forest. Come and
Yeah.
experience the
Yeah.
forest. Experience the quiet and solitude. Experience it just and realize that you can stand at a 370-foot tree or a 250-foot tree, and you're not going to know the difference. It's just come and enjoy the forest. Try not to bag the biggest thing. This is not a competition. You're
Yeah.
here and enjoy it, right? And that most people seem to embrace that message. And when they come here,
Yeah.
and they're just here for the experience. They're not here to bag a peak, basically, which is
Right.
what they're doing with this. But like I said, there's always going to be some bad actors that we'll keep at. But the education has really helped, especially with Hyperion's the name of the tallest tree in the world. That's the one with the closure around it. That has seemed to really cut down that, plus some of our other law enforcement techniques put in place have really cut down the social trailing around that
Yeah.
tree. So
It's great that you've seen that reduction. What does, for recreation that's allowed and encouraged, what does that look like in Redwood National and State Parks?
Yeah, it's very much a traditional park in terms of hiking would be your primary way to really get deep into the forest for a lot of different things. And so if you're a hiker, it's an incredible park. It has incredible old growth paths. It has many loops for different
Oh,
different
nice.
abilities and ages. And in fact, for hiking, one thing that we put in place recently is we partnered with a nonprofit group called David's Chair, and this is a group that basically it's a tracked wheelchair. So it's like if you imagine the tracks on a tank and then put
Mm-hmm.
them on a wheelchair, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
you can imagine it's like a four-wheel drive wheelchair. And so we now
Mm,
have that in the park. So it allows people to go on. We have about 40 miles of beaches here, allows you to go on the beach and
wow.
allows you to really experience the park like in a way that can be independent rather than
Right.
having to, because it's important that folks can have that solitude and experience. So someone with a disability that needs a chair can now actually experience the forest and can experience the beach and experience it on their own terms, at their own pace, which is
Right.
the way you'd want it to be, right? That's how
Yeah.
everyone comes to the park. You want to do it. If you want to hurry through fast and look at a few big trees, great. If you want to slow down and really embrace the forest and quiet your heart and soul, this is also the place to do that, right? And this allows that group of people that maybe been excluded in the past to do that. And so that's a big part of what we're trying to do now with the Redwoods is try to reach other underserved communities that are kind of within our region, in
Mm-hmm.
terms of some of the big cities around us, and try to bring them to the parks through different engagement activities and find out what they want and try to make sure that the park is also a welcoming place for them. And so that's a big part of what we do here at Redwoods. It's just to make sure it's a welcoming place for everyone so they can
Yeah.
experience it on their own terms and their own pace.
For the efforts to, like you said, make it a more welcoming place, especially for people in surrounding areas, what are some of the projects you have been or are planning to work on?
So we've done a lot of outreach to Latino communities. We work with Latino Outdoors, and they've been
Mm-hmm.
here. We've also had we have celebrations which are targeting certain audiences, like working with Native American groups or Latino Outdoors, and celebrating around those communities so they can come and have that in the front country, and then just get that first exposure, just get them into the
Yeah.
park so that they can experience it. And then part of that is through that process, we're getting some feedback from them in terms of what they would like to see. And then we can build that into our planning structure as we're rebuilding a campground. Okay, say Latino families prefer to camp in larger campsites, right? As multi-family groups, right? So maybe we're going to build in more ability for that to happen in the
Mm-hmm.
future as we're maybe on a cyclic basis, we're rebuilding a campground. So that's the type of outreach. It's
Cool.
it's an iterative process. It's a never ending process of just
Yeah.
trying to reach out to groups that aren't here in the park and just finding out, why aren't they here? Is it just because they can't get here? We have transportation grants for school groups to come here and learn
Mm-hmm.
and have residential experiences. We have two education centers, which are great. They target school age children to come and have residential experiences in the Redwoods and learn about it. But what I've been working on is to try to expand that out much more and bring in more adults to have their immersive experience that's both residential, so they get more than a day. They're not rushing through. They're really experiencing the forest, but also experiencing it as an adult, like in ways that they want to express. For example, we started the artist in residence program here, and it's
Mm,
really, really taken off, right? It's hard to believe there was not an artist in residence
yeah.
program at such an inspiring place, but that's all part of trying to bring people in and let the artist have the time and space to express themselves. And as we bring the artist community in, and we had the poet laureate here, we're so blessed to have her here in the park. And what a great way to honor all the great work we're doing with the artist. And
Yeah.
what a great way for they experience the park in a whole nother way, right? They're not going to be hiking. They're going to be sitting and maybe being creative about music or
Mm-hmm.
art, or painting or fabric art or whatever they may be doing. That's their way to experience the forest. And so trying to just be open to all those different experiences and create those opportunities for folks to come and experience the park on their own terms.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I know I have learned about a couple of the artist in residence programs, and I'm like, how can I be an artist in
You
residence?
should definitely do
That,
it.
yeah, that
This is
sounds
your art.
awesome. Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more about my understanding is that both the Redwood National and State Park hold significant cultural value for Indigenous communities. Can you share a little bit more about their connection to the park, particularly with the ancient redwoods?
Yeah. So 1,400 acres of Redwood National Park overlaps with the Yurok Reservation.
Okay.
The Yurok, which is the Yurok tribe. It's their reservation, and they are the largest tribe in California. So
Okay.
right in the middle of the park, we similar to Death Valley, there are tribal groups that live here, and they've lived here in time immemorial. We also have we also have the Talawa people in the north and the Cholula, and so those folks have been here and still see the park as part of their ancestral territory. And so
hmm
everything we do, we try to work with them. It's beyond, we do our government to government consultation and do seek their input on
Right.
projects. But at Redwoods, I think we've taken it a whole nother step further in a lot of our different projects, in that we really try to actively engage tribal members to get their hands and their creativity and their traditional ecological knowledge into our projects. For example, with Redwood Rising, we work very closely with the Yurok Tribal Corporation, and they come out, and the Yurok Tribal Construction Corporation comes out and does some of the aquatic restoration work. They're experts at it, and they bring
That's
that
so cool.
expertise to us. They've lived here for thousands of years. They love working in their ancestral territory,
Yeah.
and they become part of the Redwood National and State Park team. And we have a similar agreements now with the Talawa people in the north and Talawa Dene Nation. And so just finding ways that, as Redwood National and State Park, we don't see it as natural resources or cultural resources. All this works together as a single resource. And part of that is it's integrating all the tribal people around us into, as much as we can, into our park projects and our park operations, so that they're having a real say, and really not just having a say, but also actually doing the work within the parks to, whether it's in, they're maintaining a building, they're painting a building, or they're restoring an ecosystem. The tribes aren't just getting a say in how we operate it in their ancestral lands. They're actually getting to do the work. And so that's something we're very proud of here at Redwoods, and that we continue to do. And it's been really, really a wonderful relationship to have with all these different tribal groups.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, there's so much that Redwood National Park and State Parks is doing. So it's really awesome to hear about it. One thing that's interesting is the unique partnership between the national and state parks.
Mm-hmm.
So could you share a little bit more about how that
Mm-hmm.
partnership works?
Right. Yeah, no, and that's great. So a little bit time machine again. We had to build
Yeah.
We're
getting a history lesson.
We're not going to go back as far as the 1910s this time. We'll go back just to, let's say, 1978, 1978, when the Redwood National Park was established in 68 and then expanded in 78. That they made a boundary, basically, Congress said, and they put a boundary around 3 state parks. And so basically, it was the intent of Congress for those state parks to then be given to the national park and have a single Redwood National Park that included these 3 state parks, which are essentially mostly old growth redwoods from the 20s that, say, the Redwoods League had purchased. And then donated to state parks. But, and so let's just say, like, from 78 to about the 90s, this was kind of the intent, and Redwood National Park was working alongside state parks. And state parks just really didn't want to give up their crown jewels, right? These are some of the crown jewels of the California state park system, which is the largest in the country, largest and oldest, and magnificent system in and of itself. And so basically the decision was made in 1994 that, since it was congressional intent and that the national and state park lands are so interwoven, it's that visitors come to the park, they don't really care whether it's national or state park land. They just want to they see a redwood forest. And that we wanted to create that experience, while also leveraging advantages from each agency about managing this across the landscape. And so we manage as a single unit these 4 different park units, and we do that through a cooperative management agreement. And that cooperative management agreement was basically started in 1994, and it continues to today. And it was so successful that Congress actually passed a law that said, you should definitely partner with California State Parks National Park. It was just in Redwoods, and they said that. And that's pretty exciting. So we've kind of had this partnership endorsed. And so what does that mean? That means when the visitor comes, hopefully they don't know whether they're moving from a National Park Service Visitor Center to a State Park Visitor Center. They ought to see, our uniform folks right next to state park folks.
Yeah.
We do as much as we can. We try to integrate our facility work, our interpretation work, certainly our resource protection work. We do it all in partnership with them, leveraging the strengths of each group. Sometimes state parks can do something more efficiently. So we'll move some money under our cooperative management agreement to them to help manage a project, and vice versa. And it creates a lot of fluidity and a lot of flexibility for me and my state park counterpart to manage this landscape as a single unit. And so the hope, and what I can tell from the visitor comments from being here, no one can really tell when they're on national or state park lands. It really is. We really have been successful with that. And there's a lot of great things that have come from that partnership. And it really has been, emulated many of places across the country now. And it really is a joy to work with California State Parks, to see how another group works, see some of the interesting things they do, and some of the interesting quirks that my agency has. And you don't really notice how quirky your group is until another group comes along and does it a different way, right? And so, and you
You're
go,
like, weird.
"I like your way better." And sometimes they go, "We like your way better," and so it's super fun to try to figure out a way to navigate that, and make, and really find the best way forward to manage this landscape. And
Absolutely.
it's really a wonderful partnership. And the other piece of it is, because partnerships is kind of in our DNA now and historically so rooted here at Redwood National State Parks, that's what naturally genesis itself to Redwood Rising, and a partnership like that, where we're doing a large scale landscape restoration with California State Parks and Save the Redwoods League. Just naturally, you wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh yeah, I'm going to partner with all these other groups to do some restoration work." We just naturally always think about partnerships and what's the best way to get something done. And can we partner with somebody to get it done better? Can we partner with the tribe to get this work done better? Like condor restoration. Can we partner with the Yurok tribe to do that versus just do it ourselves as a park? And that's always where we start now, because we are a partnership park.
Yeah, that's amazing. As we're kind of wrapping up, there's a few more questions I want to ask. The first is, we have mentioned the condor restoration briefly, so I want listeners to know what that entails. I know a little bit about it from Dave Romer, because I interviewed him, who's now the glacier superintendent, but kind of learned about that process a little bit. But yeah, can you share a little bit about what that looked like and where it's at right now?
Yeah, no, it's been very successful. Yeah, so that launched a few years ago. Yeah, Dave, as you mentioned, was a big part of the early planning process and got it through, building the partnership with Fish and Wildlife Service, the Yurok tribe, and the National Park Service, which really were the kind of three key partners, building that up, doing the environmental compliance work, not to be too boring, but all that work needs to be done.
You got to do it.
So yeah, he got all that work done, and we launched a few years ago. And I think the big key with the condor program that makes it unique, I mean, beyond condors, and I could talk about condors all day, it's super fascinating. Apex scavenger, largest bird in North America. I mean, just so interesting, a species that got so beaten up by humanity's foolishness, right? And so it down to 22 birds at one point, and now has several hundred, right? So quite the bottleneck. And now we'll have 22 birds here in the park pretty soon. So we haven't quite hit that yet. So pretty exciting. But I think what really makes the condor program unique here at Redwoods is that it's a tribally led program within a national park. So the Yurok tribe, they have great capacity. They bring great ecological knowledge. And they're bringing both that cultural renewal with bringing back the condors, and the ecological renewal, bringing back the condors together. They're bringing that perspective, and they really lead the program. They bring the expertise in terms of the condor biologists. We contribute, and the release site and the facilities are on National Park Service, and we do help, but they really are the lead. They set the tempo, the pace, and they coordinate with Fish and Wildlife Service and the National Park Service for getting the birds, the release schedule, all the complexities of a full-blown restoration program. And they do a fantastic job. And it's quite a thing to have like another group just basically running a whole giant restoration program within your park, right? Of a highly endangered species. And they're just doing such a fantastic job. And I encourage folks to Google Yurok condor webcam and go take a look at the condors up there, and they have them in the enclosure. You can watch the condors there. There's usually always the mentor condors there if you're just going to see one, and at different times of the year when new condors come and they're getting acclimated, you'll see more condors and less as they get released. And so it's a super exciting program, and it's been really successful, and really not only just doing that restoring, bringing the fact that the condors are actually flying. The biggest birds are now flying above the highest trees in the world. Like it's such an inspiring thing, but also to know that that's bringing back, it's a piece of restoring the cultural heritage that was taken from the Yurok people, 100 years ago, when they were removed from this land, and helping them restore their cultural heritage at the same time. It's a really powerful program. And it's great.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love that imagery of the biggest birds flying over the tallest trees. One thing you said that I really love is people being in the park at a pace slow enough to restore and refresh their heart and soul. And that's why we go to these places, to kind of reconnect with ourselves almost. So I really loved that. And as we finish up, the final question I wanted to ask, that I ask all superintendents, it's kind of a two-parter. So it's I'm cheating a little bit by saying that. But What is something you wish everyone knew about Redwood National and State Parks, whether they've been or not? And what's a common misconception or myth about the parks that you'd like to debunk?
Well, I think the common misperception is that Sasquatch, also known as Bigfoot, doesn't exist. So I think I've seen enough evidence to now be that I'm skeptical. I think Bigfoot might exist. So
Oh my gosh.
here at the Redwoods. So I just want to put that
So
out there.
scary.
No, he's super friendly.
Yeah,
He's so
you're
guy.
right. You're
So,
right.
you have to really be looking for evidence of the Bigfoot.
Oh my
there.
goodness. Oh my gosh.
And I think the thing that I wish everyone knew about Redwood National and State Parks is just that it's please come here and just make sure you take the time to really slow down and really embrace this very unique ecosystem, this coastal redwood ecosystem. It's so vibrant. If you just let it into your body, you will feel the energy from this forest. You'll hear the silence when you're in the forest. It will, if you give yourself a chance, this forest will move you. And that is what I would ask all visitors to just give themselves the time and space so that they can really feel the forest and embrace it. So they leave with that feeling that I'm lucky to have every day if I take the time to stand in that forest and feel.
That's amazing. Gotta catch my flight up to Redwood National and State Parks, I guess. But I love that.
Anytime.
Thank you so much for your time, Steve. I absolutely loved your passion for the redwoods, and I'm also buzzing. I'm like, these are the coolest trees ever. This is so cool. And just thank you for sharing that enthusiasm with me and hopefully with everyone who's listening.
Yeah. Thank you so much for you. I love this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for listening today. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. If you liked this podcast, rate, review, download, and tell your friends about it. This ensures the stories of our national parks and how they are run are shared. Listen to the other episodes wherever you listen to your podcasts or visit us at whorunsThisPark.com to learn more. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No